Chapter 2. The Story of Two Women. Leslie. Leslie Marshall, a beautiful blonde with a great figure, wearing a sexy black cocktail dress, was getting ready to leave a charity dinner dance when she noticed a well-dressed man with the sensuous good looks that had always attracted her walk through the door. Leslie, a dynamic accountant executive at a small advertising agency, was eager for a relationship. She had a wonderful job, good friends, great clothes, even her own condo. But one thing missing from her life was a husband. She couldn't understand why, although she'd been with many, men all seemed to want sex but not commitment. Now Leslie wanted very much to connect with his handsome stranger. So, believing it perfectly acceptable to pursue a man the same way he might pursue her, she crossed the room and with a broad smile introduced herself and asked him to dance. He accepted, and on the dance floor, Leslie learned that he was a computer consultant named Mark who had a terrific sense of humor, held her close, danced beautifully, and turned her on. 1 hour later, Leslie and Mark left the party and went to his apartment, where they barely made it to his bedroom before they began making love. A modern woman, Leslie enjoyed sex and believed in getting it out of the way early. She worried about AIDS, of course, and always protected herself, but usually when she was attracted to someone like Mark, she didn't hold back. Mark was a wonderful lover, enduring and eager to satisfy her. By the next morning, Leslie was sure she was in love with this smart, sexy, gentle, and sensitive man. Mark and Leslie's courtship began that night in a style that seems typical of today's world. They were both articulate people who believed in equality in romantic relationships. They both wanted the freedom to call each other, to plan dates, to seek the other's business and financial counsel, and to share painful feelings openly. They believed that men should display their sensitivity and still be respectable, and that women could be successful and smart and still be desirable and loving. So, what went wrong? Leslie was a giving woman. If Mark had a personal or business problem, Leslie would stay up, talking well into the night, trying to help him solve it, even though she had to get up early and go to her own office the next day. If he complained of a headache, she would rub his neck and sometimes throw in a full body massage. She even tried to help him save money. And when his car was in the shop for repair, she gave him hers so that he didn't have to rent one, even though this limited her mobility, took time away from her business, her aerobics class, and her friends. Mark thought he had struck gold. He loved the fact that Leslie was not only beautiful, powerful, willing, and sexual, but also non demanding, self sufficient, and self motivated. He respected her ability to run a business during the day and still provide a nurturing, loving environment after work. Did Leslie occasionally feel a twinge of resentment about how much she was putting out without getting much back? Well, yes, but she still never told Mark how she really felt and never let him reciprocate, even when he offered, because she feared that it would be inconvenienced or annoying doing things for her that she could do for herself. Leslie wanted to be totally self sufficient, a low maintenance woman, so that Mark would never resent her as a burden and leave as so many others had. About 4 months into the relationship, Leslie learned that a close friend had suddenly died. That night, when Mark came over, he found her in the bedroom crying. She told him what had happened, then flung herself in his arms, expecting him to comfort her the same way she comforted him. Instead of holding her close and rocking her in his arms, he began talking about a problem he was having with a broker in his office. But Leslie couldn't help Mark because she was distraught and needed him to help her. They began to snap at each other, and soon their angry words escalated into a fight. Leslie found herself losing control in a way she had never done before. God damn you, Mark, she said. Don't you care about anyone but yourself? My friend is dead, and all you think about is your career. Mark felt his anger rising as well, but he tried to hold it back. Listen, Leslie, he said calmly. I'm really sorry about your friend, and I understand how bad you feel, but there's nothing we can do about it tonight. On the other hand, my problem's got to be solved by morning. Leslie couldn't believe what she was hearing. I never ask you for anything, she cried. I always take care of myself. Why can't you give back to me when I need you? Mark's face turned dark. So you have a scorecard on me, do you? You think I owe you something. Well, I have news for you. I will not be controlled by guilt over what you do for me. I will not be manipulated by you or any other woman. A moment later, Mark slammed the door and was out of her apartment as Leslie stood, rooted in the spot, shocked by how quickly things had fallen apart. She tried to run after him, but when she reached her apartment house lobby, Mark was already gone. Leslie watched the clock for 15 minutes, then called him. There was no answer. She called again. All that night she called, but he never picked up the phone. Early the next morning, Leslie was back on the phone trying to reach Mark, but there was still no answer. She finally reached him at work. He icily listened to her awkward apology and agreed to come over that evening. That night, Leslie was on her best behavior, solicitous of Mark's every need. As they made love, she did not even think of her own needs, nor did he, and he pushed down her feelings of neglect. She was willing to put his feelings ahead of her own. Mark was the best man she had ever had, and she didn't want to lose him. But after that night, there was a subtle distance between them. One night, when Leslie tried to initiate sex, Mark angrily told her that he wasn't about to become a sex machine for her pleasure. Another time, when plans Leslie had made for the two of them coincided with something else that Mark wanted to do, he accused her of trying to control him. Then, when Leslie was describing her handling of a certain business situation, Mark's strenuous criticism of it turned into an argument when she accused him of trying to boss her around. Things would get better, then worse. Mark stopped calling as often as he had in the past, and she was so confused and miserable that she started calling him more, only to hear a coolness in his voice that made her feel as if she were intruding. Leslie tried everything she could to bring back the relationship. She read self-help books, listened to talk shows, and sought out the counsel of friends, but nowhere did she find an answer to keep from losing Mark. Daily, she felt herself slipping into the pathetic woman she never wanted to be. Abandonment and fear were becoming problems that constantly pushed her into giving more and asking for assurance, but Mark responded only by laughing or changing the subject. The more she chased after him, the more he pulled away. The nights she did get him to agree to see her seemed to end in emotional outbursts, in jealousy and fear that he was seeing another woman, all those issues she knew would drive him away. Leslie knew she had an obsession when she found herself driving by his house, watching beautiful women coming and going, women who seemed perfect in comparison to her. Then suddenly her despair turned to rage, and all she wanted to do was hurt him. One night, after begging to see her and having him refuse, she went to his apartment and knocked on the door. After a long wait, Mark came to the door, clad only in a robe. It was obvious to Leslie that he had been in bed with someone else. When would when he wouldn't let her in, Leslie started screaming, "You have someone in there, don't you?" She clawed her way past him as she tried to hold her back. She made it as far as his bedroom, where she saw a frightened woman in his bed, holding a blanket in front of her. Mark managed to push Leslie out of his apartment. Shrieking, she ran to her car, started it, and drove off wildly. But when but then she stopped and cried in the steering wheel, whimpering like a small child. Miserable and depressed, she at last knew the relationship was over. For weeks, Leslie could barely leave her home. She mostly stayed in bed, watching TV and eating. Her work suffered. Her self esteem suffered. Her body suffered. Finally, she was persuaded by a girlfriend to come to one of my seminars on relationships, where after listening for a while, she bravely came on stage and begged me to help her. Leslie is typical of many of the women I see whose pride and independence achieve much in the business arena, but little in the world of love. Like Leslie, these women think of themselves as female, but inadvertently and unconsciously take the male pursuer role in a relationship. Unfortunately, so many women are acting aggressively towards men that it is assumed to be the correct behavior. But aggressive behavior is correct only in certain situations. Leslie needed to learn about her choices: male, female, pursuer, pursued, giver, receiver, and understand that she unconsciously took the male pursuer giver role. When a woman like Leslie pretends to be the sexually generous male partner, even though she really wants to receive lovemaking in a committed relationship as the female partner, she ends up frustrated and confused. My plan was to instruct Leslie about the options, choices, and techniques she needed to achieve her goal of a serious relationship. I was to act somewhat like a parent in an age when most parents are bewildered when it comes to teaching mating practices. I asked Leslie to let me be her coach until she found her man. She started to cry, not really daring to believe that I could help her. However, I have seen enough success stories to be able to promise fulfillment, and I did so with Leslie. When Leslie asked at one point I thought her relationship with Mark had begun to go wrong, I replied, the first moment when by pursuing Mark you unknowingly chose to be the male in your relationship. He who speaks first is the male. If you had chosen to be female, you would have flirted with your eyes and your smile and let him pursue you. Leslie picked sexy men whom she approached first. In this way, she unconsciously and automatically set up the relationship so she would never get to be sexy, cherished woman. If Leslie really wanted to be pursued and loved by a generous, protective, and cherishing man, she would have to learn to be passively potent and magnetic. Leslie believed that by giving her body to Mark, she would make him fall in love with her and later make a commitment to her. But handsome and successful men like Mark have been trained out of their generous, protective, and cherishing mating skills by women like Leslie who do all the work. Once Leslie had sex with Mark without requiring a commitment first, he had no reason to cherish her feelings or reward her with love and commitment. He saw and respected her as an independent woman. He accepted her generous, sensuous, sexual gifts without any guilt, shame, or need to commit because he believed that she had thought out her desire for physical, social, and sexual pleasure and knew how to avoid painful situations. In other words, by earning respect for giving, Leslie lost the right to be cherished by Mark as a vulnerable woman. Both Leslie and Mark believed that traditionalism in roles was a thing of the past. Neither saw their partner's marriage as the one they wished for as the one they would wish for, but low maintenance women like Leslie are giving more and getting less than their mothers did before the women's movement. Neither Leslie nor Mark realized that their mothers were not just giving, they were in fact giving back to men who had been committed enough to marry them and to be respectable and responsible for their welfare. But Leslie was giving Mark all the benefits of a wife without requiring commitment from him. If Leslie had loved herself more than she loved Mark, she would have required a committed relationship. If she didn't agree to a commitment, she could say no thank you without fear of loss. Better to lose him than herself. Instead, Leslie gave Mark sex at no cost of commitment, which ultimately led her to becoming used by him. He took all she would give until she sent him a bill of guilt, which caused him to leave for a better deal. Leslie and Mark believed in equality, which to them meant that both could have their thinking respected and their feelings cherished by the other equally. Unfortunately, in a love affair, duplication equals competition. Their equality blew up the night Leslie learned that her friend had died and Mark had a business problem. Both needed help, both wanted to be given to. Leslie emotionally and Mark logically. The collision resulted in the beginning of the end of the relationship. Since they had not negotiated respect and cherishing priorities before entering the sexual area, neither felt cherished nor respected. If they had negotiated, and Mark had chosen to be the male energy and Leslie the female, she would have known that by giving Leslie some emotional, loving support and the night her friend died, he would have been given back all the logical help a comfortable woman can give. When the relationship came apart, Leslie immediately went to a doormat mode. I need him at any cost, I'll do what he wants. Her response was to give more rather than to evaluate what she had not received in the way of compassion. Seeing Leslie totally neglect her own needs in favor of his elicited dark disgust in Mark's nature. It was as if she invited abuse. He unconsciously became cold and punitive, thus getting more out of Leslie in her panic. He was totally into control and Leslie totally out of control, and she reached rock bottom on the evening she drove her car off violently. When verbal communication fails, violence ensues. Leslie began coming regularly to my seminars, persisting in her quest for a loving relationship that would endure. She began to duty date, my way of describing that tedious, boring process of exposing oneself to people one really doesn't feel attracted to until one finds someone who one does feel attracted to, wherein she was the bait, not the masculine pursuer. At first, being a magnetic, sexual, and sensuous woman made Leslie feel vulnerable and a little frightened. She was used to being in control, but I taught her that being vulnerable was safe as long as she didn't allow dangerous things to take place. For example, going home with a man she didn't know and having casual sex with him. She had to learn how to control herself without trying to control the man she was with. Leslie shared her stories about her romantic life in my seminars and asked questions about how to deal with each situation. She found that she did well with duty dates, but when she was with men she liked, she inevitably went back to her old ways, only to end up with a broken heart. Then one evening she came up on stage and told us about Walt, a freelance photographer she'd met through business. Their first date was a picnic on the beach. They had a great time, easily touching and affectionately kissing. She learned that though Walt did not have much financial stability, he was fun, easygoing, and spontaneous. Playing with Walt allowed her to feel feminine, sensual, sexual, and physical. She liked him a lot, although she couldn't help wishing he had a stronger, more assured financial future. Leslie dated Walt regularly, but non sexually, for more than 2 months, at which time he asked Leslie for a commitment. When she mentioned her financial concerns, he explained that that when they married and had children, he would climb the corporate ladder. He would do it for his family, but not for himself alone. He needed inspiration. He told her that he would like her to continue working full time until the first baby was born. Then he wanted her to consider either just working part time or staying at home with the child. Leslie thought over Walt's proposal and accepted. Soon after their marriage, Walt got a terrific job in a magazine and money started rolling in just as he said it would. After Leslie gave birth to their son, she worked for a little while but then quit. She and Walt have plans to gradually build his home studio into their business together. Although Leslie had started out as a career woman, she was now a woman with a career on the side. Some women want to be a career woman, but not Leslie. Andrea. Andrea, a real estate broker, wondered what was wrong with her. Why couldn't she make a relationship work? Why did every man she met seem to compete with her? Her sister, Margaret, who was not as pretty or smart as she was, had married 2 years earlier and was expecting her first child. Andrea just couldn't figure it out. Then one of her customers brought her to my seminar. After hearing me speak, Andrea concluded that she had been too masculine in her past relationships with men and vowed that she would now change, using my step by step method for her feminine woman she was determined to be. She met Johnny, an insurance salesman, through a friend. He asked her out almost immediately. One delightful date allowed another, and their relationship took off, one of commitment and planning for the future. At first, Andrea followed my rules of femininity as carefully as she could. She listened to Johnny's ideas and thoughts, responded with her feelings, and enlisted his opinions on things before voicing her own. She didn't tell him what to do, she didn't call him, and she didn't plan their social life. All things she had done with men in the past. But somewhere around the 4th month, Andrea's natural self began to emerge, where she began instigating the social events in their lives, being careful they fit in with her work schedule rather than his. She also started giving Johnny gifts, first a VCR and then various items of clothes. Soon, whenever Johnny tried to convince Andrea about some idea he had, instead of just telling her feelings, she began to respond with her own enthusiastic ideas. In fact, in no time she was telling Johnny her opinions about everything, including the various ways she thought he could improve. The more she began to assert herself, the more he began to pull away. He saw her enthusiastic ideas as either implementing or supplementing his own. Before long, Johnny was snapping and Andrea was attacking because she felt that he did not listen to or respect her opinions. Little by little, without Andrea understanding why, the warmth and promise of a relationship was going. Johnny felt himself slipping into frustration, into what seemed to him like a secondary position, and soon began an affair with a young assistant at his office. When Andrea discovered the affair, she ended their relationship, but she was in pain, confused over why Johnny could reject her in favor of another woman. She felt bewildered, but after listening to her story, I suggested that she might be following the wrong principles. I believed that she was a woman driven by a masculine type of energy. I explained that her training from her mother and father by the type of woman she had chosen was to be a feminine, energized, receptive, cherished woman. However, her own nature was to be an assertive, respective, career oriented woman, meaning a woman with a masculine energy approach rather than a feminine energy approach that her mother and sister employed. Andrea had initially been doing what she thought was the correct, socially accepted technique, but found her real self surfacing after the relationship was established. By suppressing her inherent inclinations, she was creating a power keg that would unavoidably explode. The trick was to discover herself, not remake herself. I suggested that she go out now into the dating market with a different approach, that she begin to express her thoughts and wants freely. If you find someone you like, tell him you would like to go out with him. When you come on with a receptive, feminine type demeanor, you're attracting the wrong men for you because you're attracting men who want to lead, instigate, and give first. But that is exactly what you really want to do. You must find the opposite in a man. A quick change attitude wasn't easy for Andrea since she had watched her mother and sister deal with men in the traditional way and had been taught that this was the only acceptable way for a lady to act to attract a man. But with my encouragement, she determined to give the other approach a try. A few weeks later, Andrea attended a singles party. She met three men and asked each for their card. Later in the week, she called them, talked briefly and cordially to each, then suggested the two of them get together for a drink. One of the men rejected her offer, and two accepted. Daniel, an accountant, the first man she met for a drink, clearly hoped that Andrea would be a fast and free playmate. He was turned off when he discovered that her assertive approach did not mean she wanted casual sex. Andrea was looking for a committed relationship with the right man, not a wild and sexual fling. Their second meeting was their last. Andrea knew he was not for her. Brian, the second man, accepted Andrew's invitation to have dinner. He was an artist who was fascinated by Andrew's business powers and her intelligence. Andrea relaxed into the relationship from the onset, giving to Ryan first and cherishing his feelings. This was the perfect relationship for Ryan, who got no thrill out of an aggressive competing in the world of business. He was delighted when Andrea suggested that she organize a showing of her paintings at a friend's gallery, thereby promoting his work. Ryan was comfortable with her energy and takeover disposition, which was a wonderful complement to his own more introspective and artistic inclinations. They married at the end of their first year together, and when their first son was born, Andrea stayed home with him for the first 6 months and went back full time to work. Ryan had shared in the child caring activities from the beginning, but then took over most of these since he worked in the home. Although not conventional, they are a very happy couple and very well suited for one another. Leslie decided to be the feminine energy in their relationship, and Andrea chose the male energy as best suited for her. Now it is your turn to make the decision. The next chapter will give you some clues about how to do it.